"If I were younger, I'd ask you to stay," she murmured with a gentle smile that carried equal parts humor and something deeper. Beneath her casual words, Darrell Simmons detected a tremor of isolation that no wrench could ever repair. The tool slipped from Darrell's grip, striking the pipe beneath the kitchen sink with a sharp clang. He flinched, not from the sound, but from the weight of her confession. Turning slightly, he caught sight of her figure in the doorway, arms casually folded, auburn hair pulled into a loose bun that had begun unraveling as the hours passed. Caroline. Whitmore wasn't what Darrell had anticipated when dispatch assigned him to repair a faulty valve in this serene Tampa neighborhood. The residence was spacious and contemporary, showing gentle signs of daily life, quiet enough that you could hear your heartbeat. She, however, appeared to be in her late 20s, carrying loneliness like a signature scent, subtle yet unmistakable. Darrell wiped perspiration from his forehead and chuckled softly, attempting to maintain the mood. "Lucky for both of us, I'm only here to repair plumbing, not mend broken hearts." Caroline gave a slight shrug. "Shame?" Then she vanished into the living area, her cream-colored cardigan flowing behind her like a curtain dropping on an impromptu performance. That afternoon had begun with his arrival in a weathered pickup truck, its air conditioning gasping like someone fighting for breath. His work boots marked the spotless driveway with dusty prints. The front garden boasted perfectly trimmed bushes and a small stars and stripes hanging from the porch railing. He pressed the doorbell. When the door opened, he nearly lost his words. She stood there without shoes, cradling a coffee cup, looking as though she'd stepped out of a gentle ballad. Her gaze showed exhaustion, but not weakness, curiosity tempered with caution. "You're here about the leak?" she inquired. "Yes, ma'am." "Simmons Plumbing," Darrell responded, raising his equipment bag like credentials. She moved aside. "It's under the kitchen sink. A steady drip that's been making me crazy." The interior carried hints of citrus and aged literature. A record player turned slowly in the corner, filling the space with Chet Baker's Horn. Darrell knelt beneath the sink, the persistent dripping marking time like a faceless metronome. Hours seemed to move differently within these walls. Initial conversation was minimal. She read at the kitchen counter, occasionally glancing his way. He worked without noise, careful not to damage the flooring. Only when he requested a flashlight. "Did she offer more than basic directions? Is this your primary occupation?" she asked. Darrell peered out from the cabinet. "Pretty much. Brings in more than food service." She nodded thoughtfully. "I used to design interiors, mainly worked with married couples. Strange how people obsess over perfect homes while their relationships fall apart." This gave him pause. Not her words themselves, but her delivery, like a painful memory barely held together with emotional tape. By the time he'd stopped the leak and secured the final fitting, late afternoon light streamed through translucent curtains in golden rays. He stood and cleaned his hands at her sink. She offered him a towel wordlessly. Then came that revealing statement. "If I were younger, I'd ask you to stay." It wasn't flirtation. It was vulnerability disguised as casual conversation. Outside, Florida's oppressive heat lingered, and his truck waited like a loyal stray at the curb. Darrell sat gripping the steering wheel without starting the engine. For a moment he stared at her front entrance. He'd serviced countless homes, fixed leaks, replaced garbage disposals, cleared blocked drains. But this felt different, like he'd stumbled into something requiring more than mechanical repair, something fundamentally broken that couldn't be fixed with tools. Back in her kitchen, Caroline leaned against the counter, gazing at the now silent faucet. The dripping had ceased, but somehow the quiet seemed even more pronounced. She sipped her remaining coffee, now tepid. The words had escaped before she could catch them. She hadn't expected any response. She simply hadn't spoken with someone who looked at her without judgment in far too long. Now the only thing leaking was the part of her heart she'd thought was permanently sealed. Darrell convinced himself it was merely follow-up service. Professional diligence. Sometimes fittings needed adjustment after installation. Better to be cautious than sorry. But as he turned onto that familiar tree-lined street the following morning, his engine purring quietly, he knew he was deceiving himself. The plumbing was perfect. He was the one still bleeding inside. The house appeared unchanged. Blinds partially closed, yard immaculate. Wind chimes singing softly from the porch. This time he parked further away, like someone returning secretly to the scene of a memory. When he knocked, Caroline appeared wearing a charcoal t-shirt tied at her waist and worn denim, barefoot once again. Her hair was loosely pulled back with a pencil piercing the makeshift bun like an artist's forgotten tool. She seemed surprised, but only briefly. "Back so soon?" she observed, raising an eyebrow. Darrell scratched his neck nervously. "Thought I should double-check the pressure valve, just to be certain." She paused, then stepped aside. "Well, if we're both pretending, you might as well come." Inside. The interior felt cooler than yesterday, fresh coffee mingling with lemon polish and something more delicate, perhaps lavender clinging to memory. Darrell approached the sink, crouched down, and examined the shut-off valve unnecessarily. Everything functioned perfectly. Behind him, he heard cabinet doors, liquid being poured. "I once despised silence," she said unexpectedly, not facing him. "Now I think I'm more afraid of what interrupts it." He remained quiet, allowing her to fill the space around them. "My former husband was an attorney," she continued. "Brilliant in his field. We live by schedules and systems. We had everything except peace. When I finally found that peace, I had no idea how to embrace it." Darrell rose slowly, cleaning his hands on the towel she provided. Their eyes connected. Across the island. "Sometimes silence is simply waiting for the right conversation," he said, surprised by his own words. She smiled. Just slightly, but it felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Do you always speak like that?" she asked. "Not usually," he laughed quietly. "Normally I just grunt and fix things." She poured coffee, handed him the mug. Then less grunting, more talking. They settled on the back patio in mismatched chairs, facing a small manicured lawn and a citrus tree holding its final fruits. Birds sang nearby. Distant dogs barked. It was quintessential suburbia that Darrell had always considered foreign territory. Yet here he sat, sipping from her cup, watching her curl her legs in the chair as if she wasn't entertaining a guest, but simply being herself. "I'm not accustomed to having company," she said almost apologetically. "I rarely invite anyone inside." "You didn't invite me," he reminded her gently. "I returned." She studied him thoughtfully. "Why?" "Because yesterday you said something unintentional," he replied. "And I heard what you really meant." She blinked, taken aback. "You think I didn't mean what I said?" "I think part of you meant it," he said. "And part of you was terrified that you meant it completely." She gazed at the citrus tree, pressing her lips into a thin line. "It's been 2 years since my divorce. No dates. No one allowed inside. Not because I didn't want companionship, but because I refused to feel diminished again." Darrell nodded, letting her speak. "With you, it's different," she added. "You didn't interrogate me. You didn't try to repair me." "That's not my role," he said quietly. "Unless you spring a leak," she laughed, genuinely this time, brief and spontaneous. Then comfortable silence returned, this time without pain. "You remind me that I'm still alive," she said. Darrell set down his mug, leaning forward slightly. "You remind me that maybe some jobs aren't meant to end when you put the tools away." They didn't kiss, they didn't touch, but something passed between them, quiet and incomplete, like turning to a new page. When he stood to leave, she walked him to the door. No words were exchanged, just a look and a small nod, like an unspoken promise. As he stepped off her porch, she called after him softly. "Hey, Darrell!" He turned. "You forgot to send me a bill." He smiled. "Consider it pending payment." She didn't laugh, but her eyes conveyed understanding. She closed the door more slowly this time, not to exclude him, but to ensure it could open again. Do you think he'll return? Would you want this kind of connection? Hit 1 if you would. Hit 2 if you think it's unnecessary. Drop a comment below. Let's discuss this together. Daryl hadn't planned a third visit. He told himself he was simply running errands in the area, but he'd turned left instead of right. Suddenly, he found himself on that same peaceful street where trees created long afternoon shadows and everything smelled of fresh grass and untold stories. He parked down the block again, almost embarrassed by how effortlessly he could appear, without justification. Walking toward the house, he rehearsed explanations. Maybe something about water pressure inconsistencies, perhaps a joke about the coffee. But when Caroline opened the door, all he managed was, "Hi." She looked at him, eyebrow raised, then stepped aside without comment. That was her way. No ceremony, no small talk, just quietly created space. Inside she was barefoot again, wearing a soft navy sweatshirt and athletic leggings, hair twisted, up, messily. The kitchen smelled of roasted tomatoes and garlic. "Hungry?" she asked as he lingered in the doorway, uncertain where to go or what to say. "A bit," he admitted. "I've been working all day. Smell like gasoline and weeds." "Perfect," she said, already retrieving plates. "Keeps things genuine." They ate at the kitchen island. Pasta and salad, her movements purposeful but unhurried. She filled heavy glasses with water, and they discussed everything and nothing. Daryl shared a story about a client wanting a koi pond without considering neighborhood raccoons. Caroline laughed, the sound richer than before, as if it had gained strength between their meetings. After dinner, they moved to the living room where design magazines sat untouched on the coffee table. She lit a candle without explanation, and the room assumed a warmth unrelated to temperature. They talked about music, the kind that marks life's seasons. She admitted she'd stopped listening to complete albums after her divorce, saying it was easier to shuffle individual songs than commit to something with a beginning, middle, and end. Daryl nodded. "I understand that. Committing to an entire story requires more courage than we realize." She turned to him then, something raw in her expression. "Do you think this, whatever this is a complete story or just a good song on shuffle?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked around the room at the soft throw blanket, the framed photos without faces, the half-burned candle filling the silence. "I think," he said finally, "that not everything meaningful needs a label." She studied him as if memorizing his response. "I don't need a label," she said softly. "I just don't want to be anyone's secret." That hit deeper than expected, because in his 26 years, Daryl had never been someone's secret, but he'd been someone's regret. He reached across the couch and took her hand. It was warm, slightly nervous, but didn't withdraw. "You're not," he said. "And I'm not here out of boredom or curiosity or to pass time." She nodded. That was enough. No declarations, no promises, just breath shared between two people who'd been holding it too long. When he stood to leave, she didn't ask him to stay. But as he reached the door, she followed, standing close enough to feel the space between them shrinking. "I never thought I'd feel secure with someone again," she whispered. "But with you it's not overwhelming, it's just authentic." Daryl touched her elbow, letting his fingers rest there longer than necessary. "Authentic is enough." She didn't kiss him. He didn't lean in, but the way she looked at him then, like the silence between them had finally found its voice, was more intimate than either action would have been. As he walked down her porch steps, the night air cooler than expected, he felt something shift, not in the world, but within himself. A realization that sometimes the most powerful connections don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, repair something no one else noticed, and remind you how good it feels to be complete, even if just temporarily. By week's end, Daryl had stopped manufacturing reasons to visit her. He no longer invented excuses about forgotten tools or phantom drips under the sink. He simply appeared, and Caroline unfailingly opened the door as if she'd been expecting him all along. One afternoon after completing a landscaping job, Darrell arrived covered in sweat and grass stains, a streak of dirt across his forearm like a badge from an invisible battle. Caroline opened the door wearing a long t-shirt and reading glasses pushed up on her head. She looked at him and shook her head, laughing. "You look like you battled a lawnmower and lost." "Might have," he grinned. "Definitely didn't win." "Come in," she said, "but don't touch anything." He removed his boots carefully to avoid tracking mud and followed her to the kitchen. She poured him water before he asked, placing the cool glass in his hand with the ease of someone who knew his patterns. They didn't speak much initially. The silence between them had become comfortable. Not empty, but full of unspoken things that didn't need rushing. She leaned against the counter while he drank, eyes tracing the sweat marks drying on his shirt. "You know," she said finally, "I'm not your girlfriend." He blinked, not hurt, just surprised. "I know." She nodded as if clarifying rather than criticizing. "I just want to ensure we're not confusing routine with significance. You're here frequently. People might talk." Darrell stared at his glass, then set it down. "Do you care what people say?" "I care what I think," she replied. "And sometimes I think I'm allowing something in that I can't afford to lose again." He stepped closer, but not too close. "You think I'm just passing through?" She shrugged, the movement small. "Aren't you?" There was no anger in her voice, only something sadder, something shaped like fear. Darrell rubbed his palm against his neck, thinking. "I've never stayed anywhere long, not because I didn't want to, but because no one ever made staying feel important." Caroline's eyes softened. "And now?" she asked. "Now I come here and I don't feel like I'm wasting time." "That's new for me." The look she gave him wasn't romantic, but it was intimate, like she'd just been truly seen. And it didn't frighten her, not yet. "I'm not ready for something major," she whispered. "But I like that you keep showing up." He nodded. "Then I'll keep showing up. No questions, no pressure, no labels," she added. "Right." They stood there momentarily, the air warm but still. Then she reached out almost absently and brushed a smudge of dirt from his cheek. It was the smallest gesture, but something about it made his chest tighten. "You should shower," she said, voice light. "But not here. I'm not that generous." He chuckled and backed toward the door. "Understood." As he stepped outside, she followed him to the porch. "Darrell," she said, just before he reached the steps. He turned. "If I were younger, you'd ask me to stay?" She smiled. "I already did." He looked at her for a long moment, nodded, then walked toward his truck. She watched him go, hand resting on the porch railing as if anchoring herself. Though she didn't say it aloud, she knew something about him had entered her life gently, like light through an open curtain. And maybe, just maybe, he was the first thing in years that made her want to leave the door unlocked. Darrell didn't hear from Caroline for 3 days. No texts, no missed calls, not even a wave from the front porch when he drove past her street on the second evening, pretending he had somewhere else to be. He told himself not to overthink it. People get busy. People need space. But something about this silence felt different. He'd grown accustomed to her rhythms, the early morning coffee aroma drifting through the screen door, the soft jazz humming from her living room, the way she opened the door as if she'd been waiting, even when she hadn't. But now, nothing. On the fourth evening, just before sunset, he found himself at her gate again, unsure whether he was crossing a line or simply refusing to let something fade without acknowledgement. He knocked gently twice. No response. He waited, then knocked again. After a long pause, the door creaked open. Caroline stood there with damp hair, tired eyes, wearing an oversized sweatshirt that engulfed her frame. She looked sleepless, as if something invisible had been weighing her down from within. "Hey," Darrell said quietly. She didn't answer, just stepped aside. He followed her in, noticing how dim the house felt. Blinds drawn, music off, the scent of lemon oil replaced by stillness. In the kitchen, she sat at the island without a word. He didn't ask what happened. He just poured 2 glasses of water and slid one toward her. Her fingers wrapped around it, motionless. "I didn't mean to vanish," she said finally. "I just needed time." "Okay," Darryl replied. "You don't owe me anything." She looked up then, eyes red but focused. "That's just it. I feel like I do, and I hate that. I told myself this wouldn't be complicated, that we wouldn't expect anything. Then somewhere along the line I started watching the clock, thinking maybe he'll stop by." Darryl leaned on the counter, watching her carefully. "Is that bad?" "It is when you promised yourself you'd never wait for anyone again," she said, voice cracking. "It is when the last time you waited they never showed up. And when they did, it was only to leave again." He nodded slowly. "Your ex?" She gave a small laugh, sharp and hollow. "He used to go silent when he was angry. Days, weeks, like withholding his presence was punishment. I guess when I stopped hearing from you, part of me panicked." Darryl moved around the counter, not to get closer, but to meet her eyes. "Caroline, I wasn't punishing you. I wasn't avoiding you. I was giving you space because I thought that's what you wanted. I didn't know you'd interpret it as silence." She stared at him for a moment, then reached for his hand, not to hold it, but just to anchor herself. "I don't know how to do this, Darryl. I'm scared of needing someone again." "Then don't need me," he said gently. "Just let me be here. Not as an answer, not as a solution, just present." She nodded slowly. They sat in quiet for a long time, hands resting near but not touching. The kind of closeness that didn't ask for anything more than trust. Eventually she stood and moved to the window, pulling the blinds open. Outside, the last light of day painted the sidewalk in warm gold. She exhaled deeply. "Stay for dinner?" she asked. "I haven't cooked, but I've got cereal and wine." He smiled, the corner of his mouth lifting. "That sounds like a commitment I can handle." She didn't laugh, but she didn't flinch either, and that was enough. As he helped her pull bowls from the top shelf, they moved around each other with the ease of people who had nothing to prove but everything to understand. No promises, no claims, just the quiet beginning of something that might last, not because it was perfect, but because it had already survived the silence. 2 weeks had passed since the cereal and wine dinner. Since then, Darryl and Caroline had settled into something unnamed, but moving with the rhythm of something real. He didn't visit daily, but when he did, it was never announced. He just appeared, and she just opened the door. Sometimes they talked for hours on her back porch, watching squirrels chase each other along the fence. Sometimes they said almost nothing at all. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It had become familiar, like background music you forgot was playing until someone turned it off. One Saturday morning, Darryl showed up with a tool bag and a cheap bouquet of grocery store sunflowers. She raised an eyebrow at the flowers but said nothing as she took them and placed them in an old mason jar near the window. "What are you fixing today?" she asked, arms crossed but smile soft. "Your leaky garden hose," he said. "It's been dripping onto the walkway." "So now you're just inventing things to repair?" "Maybe," he said. Already heading to the backyard, she followed with lemonade and sat nearby as he worked. "Do you ever think about settling down?" she asked suddenly, not looking at him. He didn't answer immediately. "I don't know what that looks like," he said. "My life's always been about movement. Fixing, traveling, starting over." She nodded slowly. "I used to think settling meant giving up, but lately I wonder if it just means finding something worth staying for." Darryl stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "Are you asking me something?" "No," she said quickly, then softer. "Maybe." He walked over and sat beside her on the steps. "Are you afraid I'll get tired of this?" She didn't respond. "Caroline," he said, voice steady. "I don't come here because it's convenient. I come because when I leave, I miss the way your house smells. I miss your strange taste in candles. I miss your quiet. That doesn't feel temporary to me. She looked at him, eyes searching. I don't want to be someone's habit. You're not, he said. You're the one place I feel like I can remove the tool belt and just exist. She exhaled slow and shaky, then leaned her head gently on his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, listening to wind rustle through the lemon tree. Later that evening, they cooked dinner together. Nothing fancy, just roasted vegetables and rice. But they moved around the kitchen like people who had been doing this for years. She handed him a spoon without asking. He stirred without being told. It was in these tiny ordinary moments that something extraordinary took root. After dinner they curled up on the couch, legs tangled under a soft blanket. A movie played on low volume. Forgotten halfway through, she rested her head against his chest. You know this can't stay undefined forever, she murmured. Eventually we'll have to call it something. Darryl kissed the top of her head and whispered, Then call it yours. She closed her eyes, letting that settle into her bones, the words wrapping around her like the blanket they shared. Maybe it didn't matter what they called it. Maybe some things were meant to be felt more than labeled. Maybe the truest kind of connection was the one that didn't need explanation. Only presence, only effort, only the quiet choice to keep showing up. And tonight, like every time before, he had. The following week brought a shift. Not in words or promises, but in weight. Darryl could feel it the moment he stepped onto Caroline's porch and noticed how she hesitated before opening the door. It was a pause so slight most wouldn't have caught it, but he did. She smiled. Yes. And let him in. Yes. But something behind. Her eyes had changed, like a door still open but no longer inviting. He didn't press her. Instead, he walked inside, removed his boots, and followed the routine they'd built without ever writing it down. The house looked the same. Same flickering. Candle on the counter, same soft jazz humming in the background, but the silence between them that day wasn't restful. It was heavy. She made coffee. He sat at the island. Neither reached for the other. My ex showed up yesterday, she said finally. Her voice calm but clipped at the edges. Unannounced, like he used to. Darryl said nothing, just waited. She stared into her mug. He wanted to talk, said he missed normal, that he never realized how quiet the house had gotten without me. She gave a dry laugh. Ironic, isn't it? What did you say? Darryl asked. I said I was happy now, that there was someone else. She glanced at him. I think I meant it. Darryl nodded, not needing more. She looked at him for a long moment. He asked if we were serious. And what did you tell him? That I didn't know. That we didn't label it. She paused. He laughed. Said that meant it wasn't real. Darryl's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed soft. You don't owe him your definition of real. Maybe, she said, her eyes glassy now. But maybe I owe it to myself. Darryl stood, crossed the space between them, and rested his hands on the counter's edge. Then let's define it, he said. Right now, whatever you need it to be. She shook her head. That's not how it works. Definitions aren't for today. They're for when things fall apart, and you have to remember why you tried in the first place. Darryl looked down, his thumb tracing a line in the wood grain. I don't want to be something you need to remember. I want to be something that stays. Caroline closed her eyes for a second, inhaled deeply, then walked over and placed her palm gently on his chest. I don't want you to stay because you feel responsible. I want you to stay because the silence we built here is better than any noise out there. He placed his hand over hers. That silence saved me. She smiled, weak, but real. Then let's protect it. They didn't talk about her ex again that night. Instead, they curled up on the couch, wrapped in the familiarity they had crafted from evenings like this. The world outside was still loud, still full of people who didn't understand, still echoing with judgment. But inside, the house remained a sanctuary, no longer just hers, not yet fully his, but quietly, undeniably, becoming theirs. Sunday morning sunlight spilled through Caroline's living room window in long golden stripes that danced across the hardwood floor. The scent of fresh coffee curled through the house like an old song, familiar and slow. Darryl sat at the kitchen table, barefoot, a mug in his hands, wearing the same black t-shirt he'd left folded over the back of her chair 3 nights ago. Across from him, Caroline sat in a worn hoodie and cotton shorts, hair loose and untamed, eyes still soft with sleep. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. It had become one of those mornings where words would only dilute what was already understood. The quiet between them wasn't just peaceful now, it was earned. Caroline reached across the table and tapped the rim of his mug with her spoon. "Yuri, know what I realized?" she said, voice just above a whisper. "Hmm?" he answered. "This house doesn't feel empty anymore." Darryl looked at her, really looked, and nodded slowly. "It never was. It was just waiting." She smiled and leaned back in her chair, letting her legs stretch out so her toes brushed against his. "You always say the right thing," she said. "No," he replied. "I just don't waste breath on the wrong ones." Outside, a delivery truck rolled by. Somewhere down the street, someone was mowing a lawn. The normalcy of the world hummed around them, but inside the house it felt like time had paused just long enough to be noticed. After breakfast, they walked to the backyard together. Caroline pointed out a patch of lavender she had almost forgotten. She planted. "I thought it had died," she said, kneeling to touch the soft gray-green leaves. "But look." Darryl crouched beside her and nodded. "Some things come back when you stop expecting them to." She didn't respond right away, just plucked one stem and brought it to her nose, closing her eyes. He watched her. This woman who had once told him she didn't know how to let anyone in, now sitting beside him in the dirt, barefoot and unguarded. He reached over and brushed a smudge of soil from her cheek. She opened her eyes and met his gaze. "What are we doing, Darryl?" He could have said anything. Could have talked about time or space or the way two people can become a rhythm without trying. But instead, he simply said, "We're growing." Caroline leaned in and kissed him. Gentle, intentional, without hesitation. It wasn't desperate or questioning. It was a confirmation, a sentence spoken without words. That night, as they lay together on the couch, the lights low, and the windows cracked just enough to let in the night air, Darryl traced slow circles on the back of her hand with his thumb. "I might not be the man who writes poems," he said softly, "but I can promise you I'll never be the one who disappears without a word." She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just pulled his arm tighter around her waist and whispered, "Then stay, as long as it still feels like this, just stay." And in that moment, with the weight of the past still present but no longer heavy, with the world still spinning fast outside their little bubble, Darryl knew some stories don't need big endings. They just need someone who refuses to leave when the silence gets too quiet. It was mid-August when Darryl told her he might be moving. The air was thick, not just with heat, but with something unspoken, something slowly building since the first time he touched her front gate with hesitation and a toolbox. They sat on the porch that evening, sharing a bowl of cherries and watching the sun melt behind the rooftops, the sky bruised with purples and fire. "There's this apartment," he said, voice low. "Closer to downtown. Still a dump, but better than the motel." Caroline didn't look at him right away. She popped a cherry in her mouth, chewed slowly, then set the pit in a paper towel. "Sounds like progress." "It is," he said. "Finally saved enough. Got a little space, a little light. Maybe a place I don't have to keep packed in case life changes overnight." She nodded. "You'll be around less." He didn't reply. She turned to him, eyes unreadable. "You were never supposed to stay, were you?" "I never promised I would," he answered, "but I didn't plan to matter this much either." Her lips curved, not in a smile, but something close to surrender. "And yet, here we are." Silence stretched between them. Not heavy this time, but full, like the last breath before diving under. "Do you regret it?" he asked finally. "Letting me in?" She shook her head. "No. You taught me how to sit with the quiet without feeling small inside it. You reminded me that I'm still someone worth listening to, even when I don't say much." He looked down at his hands, calloused and steady. "You made me feel like I wasn't temporary." She placed her hand over his, firm and warm. "You weren't." Later, he helped her bring in the patio cushions, folded the blanket they always shared, watered the lemon tree one last time. It wasn't a goodbye. Not exactly. More.